Who would you rather see in the NLCS, the Dodgers or the Padres? We'll talk about that and more on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONMLB to win $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, so tonight we will watch Game 5 of the NLDS between the Los Angeles Dodgers and the San Diego Padres, played in LA. It is going to be a clash of the Titans. Two teams exhausting everything they can to try to advance. Hey, you can't watch Mets baseball for a couple more days. You might as well tune into that game. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch. Meanwhile, on the American League side, it's worth noting that the Yankees have advanced to the ALCS. So there's a world where we could be talking Subway Series at some point in the not too distant future. So that could be a lot of fun. Meanwhile, there will be a Game 5 in the other ALDS between the Guardians and the Tigers. But let's focus in on the Dodgers or the Padres. Which of these two teams would you rather see in the NLCS? And if we were going to take this based on the season series, how the Mets matched up against these teams during the regular season, there's a clear answer of who they would rather see. And that's the San Diego Padres. The Mets went 5-2 against San Diego during the regular season. And remember, there was that game that Edwin Diaz blew late, Jackson Merrill with the walk-off homer. Very well could have gone 6-1. So the Mets really did handle the Padres well. The Dodgers, on the other hand, they went 2-4. Now, I also think the narratives are interesting to discuss here because I believe playing the Padres would be a better narrative. It would fit more to what this team has been, their road to get to this point. Because in a lot of ways, for a lot of guys on this roster, this run to the NLCS sort of started with that great 2022 team that won 101 games. You had Marte on that team, of course, Nimmo, Alonso, Lindor. A lot of the core that is still here has been reshaped. A lot of the roster has been reshaped around that core that had that great season, and that great season ended against the San Diego Padres. So a chance to get a little bit of revenge on San Diego for what happened a couple of years ago. Now, the other aspect I think that's interesting is the Padres and the Mets has sort of run a parallel course over the last 3 years. 2022, the Padres also put it all together, had a great regular season. They beat the Mets, obviously, and they went on to the NLCS where they lost to the Phillies. But great year. They went to that offseason. They spent a bunch of money. They got Xander Bogaerts. They retooled. They wanted to get better. They wanted a chance to put themselves over the top. And just like the Mets, they fell flat on their face in 2023, did not make the playoffs. 2024, they reshaped their roster. They traded Juan Soto. They brought in more pitching. Through that Juan Soto trade and some other prospects they added in, they were able to get both Michael King and Dylan Cease for the rotation. And they've been able to roll and have a great season this year, very similar to the Mets. They also really took off down the stretch like the Mets. These have been the best two teams in baseball since June. So it feels fitting for the Mets to meet the Padres in the NLCS. With that said, on the other side, there is still some narratives to chew on if it's Mets-Dodgers. The fact that the Mets had to go through the Dodgers to get to the World Series last time in 2015. Yoshinobu Yamamoto spurned the Mets in free agency, took their contract, brought it to the Dodgers and said, hey, will you sign me to this? They said, yes. All right, let's get a deal done. You'd have a chance to face Yoshinobu Yamamoto at least once, if not twice, in this series. And Yamamoto has not really been himself. He was hurt for a lot of the year. His comeback hasn't really been great. So you might have a chance to beat up on Yoshinobu Yamamoto. Also, we spent a lot of time talking about MVP, Shohei Ohtani, Francisco Lindor, maybe most outstanding player versus most valuable player. That would be fun, too, to see on the biggest stage, can Lindor will his team over Ohtani, and how much impact can Ohtani have as the DH in the series compared to Lindor, who's playing shortstop and obviously batting leadoff. So either way, it's going to be a fun matchup. Diving into the numbers and the rosters, I really think you're looking at two teams where they have very similar strengths and very similar weaknesses, where the Mets have advantages in some respects against both teams and then a big disadvantage against both. And that disadvantage is the bullpen. Okay. These are two teams that have elite bullpens. To get to a game 5, the Dodgers said, we don't have a starting pitcher we trust. We're just going bullpen game, and they shut out the Padres. You're looking at two bullpens that have maybe 6+ arms that they really like, where the Mets, it's Edwin Diaz, Ryan Stanek, and then just throwing a lot against the wall and seeing what sticks. Obviously, you have Reed Garrett and David Peterson. We'll talk about the pitching in the final segment today, but there's the one glaring weakness for the Mets that these two teams are going to have a huge advantage in. But I also think the Mets have better starting pitching than both of these teams at this stage. Far more depth when it comes to their starters. The Dodgers and the Padres, they're each looking at about 3 starters. For the Dodgers, it's Yoshinobu Yamamoto, who again hasn't really been himself, Jack Flaherty, who's been great, and then Walker Buehler, who also hasn't quite been himself coming off Tommy John surgery this year. He did gut through 5 innings of a playoff start, but he gave up, 6 runs? And then there's Landon Knack, who they didn't even really trust to make a full start. He just pitched an inning of their bullpen game. The Padres lost Joe Musgrove to Tommy John surgery in the playoffs. So for them, it's Dylan Cease, Yu Darvish, and Michael King, with maybe a little bit of Martin Perez in a 7-game series that might need him. You look at that group, and I would say it's probably a little bit better than the Dodgers, but maybe not too much better. And I think the Mets, with their depth, having 5-6 starters, really, can, depending on how you categorize Senga, who's not going to be full go, they have a much better rotation than either of these teams, in my opinion. Now, you go to the offensive side of things, right? Which team scares you more? The Dodgers have Shohei Ohtani and Mookie Betts, and in my opinion, that scares you more than Fernando Tatis and Manny Machado. You look at the lineups for the Dodgers: Ohtani, Betts, Teoscar Hernandez, Max Muncy, Will Smith. They're sort of top 5. For the Padres, Luis Arraez, Tatis, Jurickson Profar, Manny Machado, and Jackson Merrill for their top 5. Xander Bogaerts obviously could have a moment. He hasn't been the best hitter this year. He struggled since he's been in San Diego. And then it's David Peralta, Jake Cronenworth. They got some other guys. Kyle Higashioka is their catcher. Both of these teams, the Padres and the Dodgers, I think are going to have a weaker bottom third of the lineup than the New York Mets. The big question with the Dodgers is Freddie Freeman. He's got an ankle injury. He couldn't play game 4. They think he's going to play game 5. It's really just a matter of, can he will himself onto the field? His ankle doesn't really prevent him from hitting, though I don't know if he has the same power, but it's still Freddie Freeman in the box, still has the same plate discipline, can still get knocks, but he really can't run at this point. So Freddie Freeman, if he was at full strength, I would be saying without a doubt you want to see the Padres. Because Freddie is hurt, I really think it's about a wash. I think the one element that I was able to key in on that I think maybe makes the Padres the more favorable matchup is the fact that the Dodgers had one of the best WRC pluses in baseball against left-handed pitching. WRC plus is weighted runs created plus, measures hitters on a league average of 100. Simplest way to understand this is at any point over 100 is how much better they are than the league average offense. So for the Dodgers against lefties, they had a 121 WRC plus. That was, I think it was top 2 in baseball against lefties. Padres 96 WRC plus. The Mets are going to run out there Sean Manaea, José Quintana, David Peterson could pitch some big innings in this series. So if you look at it from that lens, I think facing the Padres, who struggle against lefties, where you have a Jackson Merrill, a Luis Arraez, some of these left-handed hitters that maybe don't see them quite as well, where that might be an edge that they're not going to have against the Dodgers. The Dodgers are just great offensively against left-handed or right-handed pitching. For the Padres, they more feast on righties, although they do still have Machado and Tatis that are obviously righties that can hit your lefties. But overall, I look at those two teams, and I think if I had to pick the one I'd rather see, It's the Padres because, for one, there's that left-handed element that maybe the Mets can exploit, being able to get more other left-handed starters against the Padres than the Dodgers. But overall, I just think the narrative is better. And I also think that Shohei Ohtani and Mookie Betts, even though you might look at the Padres and say, oh, they got maybe better pitching slightly, at least better starting pitching, the prospect of beating Ohtani and Betts is really tough. And I feel like Mets pitching can probably exploit Machado and Tatis a little bit better. Tatis has been on a different planet in October, but still, compared to arguably, if you want to rank the top hitters in baseball, the top overall players, it's Aaron Judge, Shohei Ohtani, and Mookie Betts right now. I feel like those are the best three players in Major League Baseball. Two of them are on that team. And Teoscar Hernandez, Max Muncy, Will Smith, those are no slouches. And if Freddie Freeman's on the field, he's in the box, you know he's going to crush Mets pitching. I think I'd rather see the Padres, but honestly, I think you're looking at very similar series either way, where the Mets are going to have to beat whichever team they face with their starting pitching and with their overall depth when it comes to their position players. So that's where we're going to focus the rest of the show. In the next segment, I want to talk about the return of Jeff McNeil. How much better does that make the Mets? We'll get into that in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Robinhood Gold. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.5% APY on uninvested cash, receive unlimited 1% deposit bonuses, and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risks. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure to become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways. And I'm actually going to run one today. So for all of you insiders listening, make sure you stay tuned. You're going to get a text today about some new giveaway. I got to see what I got and decide what the best signed photo is for the occasion. But again, make sure you check that out. If you want to be part of the giveaway, just subscribe. You can find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. All right, let's talk a little bit about Jeff McNeil because he could be a real difference maker in this series and the rest of the Mets run. It was awesome that he was in the building, got to celebrate with his teammates for this team clinching at home. That was an awesome moment for everyone there. And Jeff McNeil, while he's polarizing to some because his performance certainly at the beginning of this year was not great, and at times he doesn't help himself with, the frustrations that he can have boil over on the field when he gets out. But still at his core, Jeff McNeil is a homegrown Met who is a multi-time All-Star, has had a lot of good moments in a Mets uniform. He was a big part of this team at the beginning of the second half where some other guys are really struggling in the lineup. Jeff McNeil, outside of Francisco Lindor, was the Mets' best hitter for a stretch. So he really was a key figure in getting the Mets to this point, and getting him back only makes this team better. I know Luis Angel Acuna got a cult following with his amazing week helping fill in for Francisco Lindor. But if you think Luis Angel Acuna is a better player than Jeff McNeil today, I'm sorry. That's just not true. Acuna has gotten 2 at-bats in this playoff run. He struck out both times. I think Luis Angel Acuna earned his World Series ring if the Mets are fortunate enough to get those 8 more victories based on what he did in that week replacing Lindor when the Mets went 6-1. He played out of his mind. It was amazing to see. That's a chapter in the championship DVD. Again, if the Mets get there. But Acuna is not going to be a difference maker in the upcoming playoff games. Jeff McNeil could be. And I really want to break down what some of the other guys have done offensively so far, because when your team is winning in the playoffs, it feels like everybody is contributing. It's not exactly the case. If you actually look up and down the lineup, there's a lot of Mets who haven't fared that well offensively. And the first one that surprised me was Tyrone Taylor. In my eyes, he's given the Mets great at-bats, and I still think he is. And I don't know if I would say, go with the outfield of Jeff McNeil in left, Brandon Nimmo in center, and Starling Marte in right. Actually, I don't think I would do that because I just believe that having Tyrone Taylor in center field and keeping Nimmo where he's comfortable in left, it just makes your pitchers better. And so I don't think I'd sacrifice that much defense for offense. With that said, if the Mets are struggling offensively and Tyrone Taylor through the first 2 games of the series is 0 for 8 with 7 strikeouts, that is a card you can pull. And so far in the playoffs, Tyrone Taylor is 2 for 23. He's got a 130 batting average, 1 walk, 8 strikeouts, 167 on base percentage, only 1 double. And then he has scored 3 runs, but he hasn't necessarily been a great at bat or a great bat in the lineup, even though at times it does feel like he's given the Mets some pretty solid at bats. The results have not been there. Harrison Bader's 1 for 7. You add Jeff McNeil, that allows you more roster flexibility. Maybe you start Tyrone Taylor, and in a big spot, you put Jeff McNeil into pinch hit, and you could always, sub out Starling Marte after that potential inning and have McNeil shift to right, Bader to center. It just gives your team so many more options. So I really could see McNeil factoring into that outfield mix in a pretty big way. Also, he could get some starts from Jose Iglesias. Now, on the surface, you'd say, man, you can't take OMG out of the lineup. You can't take Candelita out. He's been unbelievable, right? He was great in September, had that amazing hitting streak. In the playoffs, he's 6 for 29. He's hitting 207, 233 on base. He's drawn 1 walk, 3 RBIs. He's still very good. He should be in there against against left-handed pitching. He should absolutely be there for all of those potential at-bats. And I still think he should start these games for the most part, but Jeff McNeil might be a better bat in these series. You really don't know how they're going to progress. There could be some really bad matchups. I don't know what Jose Iglesias' numbers are against Dylan Cease, for example, but maybe Jose Iglesias is 0 for 12 with 11 strikeouts against Cease in his career. Again, we'll find those out as we kind of get into the nitty-gritty of these series. But again, Jeff McNeil gives you a potential better option. Also, lately, we have seen the Mets sub Mark Vientos out for defense late in games. And the problem is that puts Acuna in the lineup. Now, if you're going to sub Vientos out and slide Iglesias to third, if you want to make that call, and I would actually argue the Mets should just roll with Vientos. I think the defense has been good enough, and you never know with the playoff game, and I would not want my best hitter out of the lineup just for defense. But if you do continue to go that route, at least it's Jeff McNeil instead of Acuna, right? Going down the line of other Mets, Jesse Winker is 2 for 9 with a huge home run and a huge triple, 3 RBIs. He's gotten on base at like a 460 clip. I think Jesse Winker should continue to get run. JD Martinez, 4 for 14, all 4 hit singles, but 2 walks, getting on base at a 375 clip, hitting 286. If the Mets play the Dodgers, I want to see JD in the lineup because he's very comfortable in that ballpark. Had one of his best seasons last year as a Dodger. So I think you're still going to get him in there. But again, McNeil gives you some other options. Starling Marte, I would say play him every game. And I'm not going to really push off of that too much. But I will note, I was surprised looking at the stats. He's 4 for 20. That's not necessarily the batting average you would expect, considering, how much run he's got and how many big hits it seemed like he has. He has 5 RBIs, though. So all those hits have been big ones. He's drawn 3 walks. I still want Marte in the lineup, but with Jeff McNeil playing in the Arizona Fall League for the next couple of days, and I don't think I said that yet, Major League Baseball did accept the Mets petition to allow him to play in those games. So he's going to play Friday and Saturday to get ready for being added to the roster on Sunday. He's going to play in second base and right field, and that's kind of an indication on how his versatility can help the Mets, whether that's subbing in for Starling Marte late in the game, giving you a better bat still, but still, better defense out there, or if that's just maybe starting in right field over Starling Marte. There's a bad matchup, putting Marte on the bench, or if they want to DH Marte and play McNeil in right, that's another option they have. Just since we're talking about the stats, though, where this Mets lineup has thrived has been their top 4 hitters. Pete Alonso, Mark Vientos, Francisco Lindor, and Brandon Nimmo have all had a really good postseason so far, particularly Pete Alonso. 3 home runs, 6 RBIs, 7 walks to 8 strikeouts, 433 on base percentage. Pete has been great, been locked in. Mark Vientos hitting 429, 467 on base, 714 slug, 2 home runs, 2 doubles, 12 hits, and 28 at bats. He's been sensational. Lindor hasn't hit for the highest average, 259 average, but he has 3 doubles and a homer, and he's getting on base at a 382 clip. Obviously had the biggest swing of the playoffs so far with that grand slam. 6 RBIs, 6 runs scored. Then you have Nimmo, who was giving you great at-bats. I think he might have a huge series in him because his numbers overall are good. They're not great. He's hitting 269, 387 on base, 385 slug, but he's only struck out 5 times, and I just feel like he's due for some big moments because Alonso has had the big moment. Lindor's had a couple. Vientos has had a couple. Brandon Nimmo, he had the 2-run homer that was critical. Was it 2-run or 3-run? I don't even remember now. In that Braves game to get into the playoffs, but he hasn't had as many big postseason moments yet. He's been very good, but I mean, there has been, the hit before Lindor against Devin Williams, that was a good moment, but like where the game ends because Nimmo hit the home run, we haven't seen that yet. I'm excited because potentially that could come in this series. When you look at the Mets' strength against these other teams, I think their bench is significantly deeper than either the Padres or the Dodgers. I think the bottom third of their lineup is going to be better as well. When you have Francisco Alvarez batting ninth and the potential spark plug he is, I'm sorry if you're comparing him to Kyle Higashioka of the Padres. It's just a different threat, I feel, in that 9-hole. I like the Mets' depth in either of these series. The ability for Carlos Mendoza to play matchups, plug different guys in at different times. I think that's going to be a huge strength the Mets have in this series, regardless of the competition. The biggest determining factor, though, on if the Mets are going to advance is going to be the pitching. How do the Mets leverage their pitching strength against their weakness and their deficiency in the bullpen? I want to talk about that in the next segment here. First, though, a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you watch the winnings roll in. Get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of the Prize Picks community today, where you can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks, so you can turn $10 into $1,000. Cook up hot takes with your friends and win real money this football season when you and your crew run your game on Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best way to win real money this football season. Which players are going off, which ones aren't. Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinions into real money all season long. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB. You're going to get $50 instantly when you play 5. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Our goal now is to get to 11,000 subscribers by the end of the postseason. I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. All right, let's talk about the pitching for the New York Mets. And I think there's a couple of X factors in this series. The first one I want to mention is David Peterson. I think David Peterson has to stay in the bullpen, and I hate to say that because I would love nothing more than to watch David Peterson get the ball for a playoff start. He has earned that. I think Peterson could win you a playoff game going 7 strong. I really do. But if those 7 innings could instead be split up across 3 different games, and David Peterson could help you in multiple games, getting big outs at the end of games, I think that's more valuable. And I think for sure at this point, you have Jose Quintana, who deserves playoff starts, Manaea, and Luis Severino. And Kodai Senga is probably going to be used as a starting pitcher in what will still essentially be pseudo bullpen games. So Peterson can get a lot of bulk in those games and really help the Mets. We saw them use that strategy in game one to get the early lead on the Phillies. Go to Senga for the first two, and then David Peterson for three. Now we'll see how that is changed for this series. And I think that's the most interesting thing to try to figure out. How will they deploy Kodai Senga? Because I do believe that David Peterson is going to be available out of the bullpen for all these games. And depending on how things go, yeah, maybe he might get a start, but more likely than not, I think Peterson is in the pen. And I think Senga is going to get at least a start. Question is, when will he make that start? Now, Kodai Senga needs 5 days rest in between appearances. So if you start him game one, you will get him multiple times in the series, but I don't know if that is the best course of action. I think the Mets should allow Kodai Senga on Friday to pitch a sim game with their hitters at Citi Field and get to that pitch count that he was going to get in a potential game 5 against the Phillies. Let Kodai Senga go 3 innings against Mets batters, get 45 pitches under his belt. Now, that's going to take him out until game 4 of the NLCS. But what that does is that would potentially allow him to get up to 60 pitches in that game 4. And then if you're fortunate enough to get to the World Series, you might just have him game 1 of the World Series at 75 pitches with a chance to make another start and maybe get up to 90 pitches and actually be close to full go by the end of this whole thing. And not that the Mets should be playing the long game, but based on how Senga and the rest that he needs in between outings would limit them, I think the best way to utilize him is to, again, have him get built up. And man, I struggle to say utilize there. I need to acknowledge it. I heard it. I'm sure you heard it. It was a rough one for me, but we're going to leave that in the show. Kodai Senga, if they have him throw the same game on Friday, right? You have him go game 4. Here's how I sort of envision the Mets lining up their rotation for a potential 7-game series. Manaea could go game 1 on regular rest. If it's me, I'm starting my ace. And at this point this season, Manaea is the ace. It's not Kodai Senga. Fortunately, injuries prevented that from happening. So Manaea is the guy. And I'm going to my best game 1. Game 2, Luis Severino. Game 3, you get José Quintana back home at Citi Field. Game 4, Kodai Senga would be on 5 days rest if he threw those 45 pitches on Friday, as you guys are listening to this. That would maybe mean 60 pitches of Kodai Senga. Instead of 3 innings, maybe you get 4 or 5 out of him, right? Then you go back to Manaea game 5, Severino game 6, and Quintana game 7, and David Peterson's available whenever you need him across that series. I think that is the cleanest way to set up your pitching, and I think that's how the Mets have the most success. I want Manaea taking the ball twice. I want Severino taking the ball twice. I want Quintana taking the ball twice because I think there's going to be some games there where the Dodgers or Padres are going to have to go bullpen and you can beat them with your starting pitching. Now, here's the alternative. Let's say the Mets don't pitch Senga on Friday. They have him throw some type of a bullpen or whatever it is. They basically say, we're going to commit to Kodai Senga as our game 1 starter. Well, now you go Senga game 1, Manaea game 2, Severino game 3, Quintana game 4. You come around to game 5, Kodai Senga would not have sufficient rest to pitch that game. It would be 4 days rest. Manaea would be on 3 days rest. All of a sudden, you don't have a game 5 starter. I don't think the Mets can go with Kodai Senga game 1 because it limits you too much because he needs 5 days rest. That's why you got to go Manaea game 1. Now, there is an alternative route. The Mets can go Manaea game 1, Kodai Senga game 2. Now, this would set them up to then go Sevy, Quintana, back to Manaea at home for those 3 games played at Citi Field. Kodai Senga would then be more stretched out, so he could pitch a game 6 at that point, and then you go back to Severino game 7 with maybe Quintana available out of the bullpen on 3 days rest, and of course Peterson available throughout. If you want the most pitches out of Kodai Senga, having him go game 2 and game 6 would give you maybe 45 pitches game 2, 60 pitches game 6, so you might get 105 pitches out of Kodai Senga instead of just 60 if you start him game 4. But the difference for me is now you might not get 2 starts out of Quintana. And I think I'd prefer 160 pitches out of José Quintana instead of 110. Like I just think you have to ride the hands that got you to this point, and the Mets are in the position that they are because of the full seasons they got out of Manaea, Luis Severino, and Jose Quintana. And then David Peterson as well, but Peterson now I think is most vital to this team, pitching out of the bullpen. And when you look at that side of the equation, that's where the Mets are going to be at the biggest weakness here. They got Edwin Diaz, who you mostly trust. You got Ryan Stanek, who you mostly trust. You got Reed Garrett, who I think at this point you mostly trust. And then there's David Peterson. Beyond that, there is Maton, who had a bad NLDS, Jose Buda, who hasn't looked good lately, but I still think you have to trust him for some innings in a 7-game series. And then Tyler McGill, who is more trusted, I think, than Danny Young or Adam Ottavino, but certainly not trusted to the degree of David Peterson. But that's what you're going to roll with. So I really think the Mets need to make sure that they get the most they can out of Manaea, Severino, and Quintana so that they limit the amount of exposure their bullpen has to cover. And the best way to do that is to open the series up with Manaea and then go to Severino, Quintana, and set those guys up to all get a second start. You have Kodai Senga as this big wild card in that middle game, game 4, and you get Kodai Senga pitching in front of Mets fans, which would be awesome. And if he throws on Friday, again, you're getting Kodai Senga for 60 pitches potentially, where maybe he could get you through 5 innings if he's a lights out, but at least you get 3 or 4. I think that's the best way the Mets can sort of deploy their pitching. We'll see what they decide to do. All of these questions will start to get answered whenever the Mets announce a Game 1 starter. We're going to see over the next 2 days, again, how Jeff McNeil does in the Arizona Fall League. He's going to play Friday and Saturday. Then they'll probably finalize and add him to the roster on Sunday. And that's when this whole thing begins. For those of you who haven't seen the TV schedule, let me pull it up real quick. You're going to have on Sunday, it's going to be 8:15 on Fox. Monday, 4:08 p.m. Eastern time on Fox. And then Wednesday should be at 8:08. So we're going to start to get some night games again, which should be a lot of fun to see the Mets in prime time. It is going to be an amazing series no matter who they play on tomorrow's show. I will talk about the result of Game 5 in the LDS. Who are the Mets squaring off against? And I'll give you any more news items that we get. We'll talk about Jeff McNeil's first game, the Arizona Fall League, whatever else is pertinent when it comes to this series. I appreciate all of you who continue to tune into Locked On Mets across this amazing playoff run by your New York Mets. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Goal now is to get to 11,000 subscribers by the end of the postseason. Appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. Follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. If you want to get on the Locked On Mets giveaway, find the link to our Locked On Mets insiders in the episode description. And thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything world of sports. Talking about Locked On Sports Today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.